Okay, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending our webinar today. My name is Ashley Linders and I'm the marketing lead here at Encompass Solutions. At Encompass, we specialize in ERP consulting and implementation to help manufacturers solve challenges, streamline their operations, and help drive growth. As a premier partner of Epicor, we deliver tailored ERP solutions that empower businesses to succeed. And we are headquartered here in North Carolina, and we have been in business for over 23 years with just over 40 staff members around the globe. Andy, if you just want to transition to the next slide. Thank you. Our focus is on manufacturing and distribution, primarily using Epicor software. One characteristic that makes Encompass Solutions stands out is that we are very partner focused. We have almost 20 years of experience selling Epicor software while being part of the Premier Partner Program. And we have a certified team of consultants that partner with businesses like yours to help with ERP implementations, software enhancements, customizations, and reporting. If you go to the next slide, please. Today we are exploring Automation Studio presented by Andy Dancan. Just a few things before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be emailed to you. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those into the question box in your Zoom control panel, and we'll bring them up after the demo during our Q&A session at the end. And we also encourage you to take the survey after today's event. And if you go to the next slide, thank you. Today's speaker, Andy Dancan, is a senior solutions engineer and has been with Epicor for over 24 years. Andy got his start in professional services and was an Epicor customer as the ERP director for medical device manufacturing, and he is based in San Diego, California. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Andy.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar on Automation Studio. First of all, I have a safe harbor statement. I might talk about things that may be delivered in the future, and those delivery dates are subject to change. So let's talk a little bit about Automation Studio, our partnership with Workato. Workato being one of the leaders in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for integration platforms as a service, or an iPaaS solution. You might be familiar with Boomi and MuleSoft and Jitterbit. Workato is one of those leaders. Now with that partnership, we've built an Epicor Kinetic connector, which gives you complete access to all the APIs, all of the methods. So there's over 1,800 APIs, 16,000 methods and so. And also there are thousands of application connectors that come with Automation Studio. An application connector is the ability to connect to a specific application and have access to its REST APIs, its methods. If we don't have a pre-built connector for your application, a lot of the applications, modern applications that are out there will have exposure to their API. So you can connect via an API. You also have the ability, if the technology is a little bit older and can only process files, you can process files with Automation Studio as well. Now, there are thousands of community recipes. A recipe is like a workflow. And the community recipes are Workato customers who have shared recipes that have been vetted by Workato and uploaded into the community library. So there's thousands of those that are there. The difference between that and the Epicor industry templates is that the community recipes don't have access to the Kinetic connector. And with that, Epicor industry templates does, and we've built recipes for our customers, and part of your subscription is to get access to these recipes, both from Workato and from Epicor, and we'll walk through that as we go through the presentation. The other thing that's nice about the application is that it is embedded within the app, within Kinetic, right? So it's a menu item that's located under System Management Integrations, and you'll find it called Automation Studio. Now it is activated through a subscription. This is a subscription-based tool, meaning that it's based on connections. So if I wanted to say integrate to Salesforce, that would be one connection, and the other connection would be to Epicor. If I wanted to integrate to Workday, that would be a separate third connection, but you wouldn't need another one for Epicor. It is a no-code, low-code tool, which makes it easy to learn and build integrations, automations, and activity flows within the system. It supports both our on-premise and cloud customers and was made available as of 2022.1. Now, I've talked about system integration capabilities. There's also activity workflows, so notifications, approval workflows, and things like that can be done with Automation Studio. And I'll be showing you some examples of that today as well. We can also automate business processes, right? So I know that there's BPMs and there's Epicor functions that are out there that can do automation of business processes. But there are times when you need to deal with multiple data sets or deal with looping through records or iterating through records. And with BPM and Epicor functions, you typically have to write C# code. But with Automation Studio, they have built-in loops, built-in ways to deal with multiple data sets, build formulas and things like that in a no-code, low-code manner. The architecture, the way it works is in the heart is the iPaaS solution, Automation Studio. We have our connector, proprietary connector to Kinetic. And then we have pre-built connectors, we have APIs, and we have files that will interact with your applications. Gartner coined this phrase, citizen developers. This is where a business analyst, a systems analyst, a power user, or somebody in IT who doesn't program has the ability to take a tool like this, learn from that tool to build those integrations, automations, and activity flows in a no-code, low-code manner. So again, giving them the power to build those types of interactions with Epicor through a no-code, low-code tool. At the heart of it is the Kinetic API and over 1,800 addressable services, over 16,000 methods. Again, anything and everything that Epicor uses, you have access to, right? And you don't have to know how the API works with Automation Studio. You would select the table that you want to update. You would select the fields that you want to map and that type of thing, and take advantage of the API. So why Automation Studio? Why an iPaaS solution? When you already have access to the APIs, a lot of our customers don't have developers, and those that do are looking for a platform to make it easy to build, maintain integrations, automations, and activity flows in the system. The other thing is upgradability, right? So with Automation Studio, we work hand in hand with Workato to make sure that the recipes that you build will not break when you take an upgrade, right? If it does, Epicor is responsible to resolve that issue with the breaking of that recipe. The other thing too is want to be able to provide a platform to make it easy for you to build these types of workflows or these types of recipes, and make it easy for you to maintain. With that, the results are faster integration development, enablement of system developers, and possibly fewer coding bugs. Your integrations and workflows are recipe driven. You'll hear me talk about recipes. We'll look at those today. You can see here, this is an example of a recipe. You can also see that this is using a for each loop, right? So again, building complex logic blocks is available to you. It's a graphical design. You have connectors to your apps, APIs, files. You can induce error handling if you have expected results within your logic, and it fails or you have an error, you can log that error to a log file, to an email, and that type of thing. Also, it has some decent debugging capabilities, right? So when an error does occur, it does provide you with the ability to debug and troubleshoot the issue and fix it. Okay, so with that, we're going to break out and take a look at Automation Studio. All right, so as I mentioned, if you were to come into your menu and you were to go to System Management Integrations, you'll see Automation Studio, right? And what I did was I opened it up in a separate tab here. And as you can see, it brings in a dashboard. And that dashboard shows jobs that are successful, jobs that have failed. You can go back and you can redo those jobs. You know, we have your application connections and tasks that are used and so forth. So again, gives you a good idea of what is going on within your Automation Studio environment. We also have API management. So the nice thing about this is it gives you the ability to build your own custom APIs. This is part of the standard subscription. If you were to go to Workato Direct, this would be a separate cost. Along with the SDK, you have the ability, this comes with the SDK, so you have the ability to build custom connectors and things like that. But for instance, if I wanted to say allow customers or certain suppliers into my system, I can build a custom API that will filter out based on the customer, based on the API key, and I can also whitelist the IP address, right? So I can know where it's coming from as far as it actively interacting with my application. The community libraries. This is where I was talking about the thousands of connectors and thousands of recipes. So as you can see, as I start scrolling down here, you can see that there are all these various different connectors, right? And to access one, say we click on Workday here, you can see that we have recipes, right? Now, you'll notice that this does not have any Kinetic connectors, but if I wanted to sync employees from Workday into Epicor, I would substitute the Oracle EBS connector for the Epicor connector. Now, as Epicor customers, only you can do this, right? Because we have you have the connector to Kinetic. Other or Workato Direct customers do not have access to that connector. There are also custom connectors that you can build, and this is part of the SDK, right? So you get the SDK that comes with your subscription of Automation Studio. And now we have industry templates. Now these are the Epicor recipes that are built by our development team. And we have things like today we'll be looking at an AP approval workflow. But we have things like that just was added here, Google Gemini working with AI technologies. And I'll be demonstrating one where I'm using OpenAI ChatGPT as well. Things like Salesforce, right? Very common CRM that a lot of people interact with. So one of the ones that was voted on by customers, and the way you get recipes added here is through Epicor ideas, right? So you submit an idea, people will look at that and they'll say you want recipes for, I don't know, we'll just say Workday. If everybody votes on that and says, yes, we would like that too, then our development team will add recipes to it. And again, they're included with your subscription. You don't have to pay for them. They're part of the subscription and you can utilize them. Now, I might say that the one thing and one caveat is they may or may not be production ready. And what I mean by that, you might want to add extra error handling and that type of thing. And maybe you want to send out notifications and such. So some of these are kind of generic and a little bit basic, but they give you the ability to utilize them and take them out of the box and modify as needed. So this is what a recipe looks like, as you can see on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side talks about how it works, the steps that are definitions of each step through the recipe. In the notes section, there are prerequisites or things that you might need to know prior to using the recipe, and then the apps that are needed. And in the upper right-hand corner, this button that says use this recipe will then take you into your projects library. And in there are your folders of recipes that you can either add to or modify, right? Now, the first one we're going to look at today is one called exchange rates, and it's using an API. And my scenarios for today is I'm going to show you a recipe that uses an API, which means it didn't have a pre-built connector. So I'm going to show you that. And then the other one is a pre-built connector and a pre-built recipe, and that will be Salesforce. The third one will be an approval workflow, right? So using email to approve AP invoices, using BPM to set rules and that type of thing. An activity flow is what we call it, but I'll demonstrate that for you today. And then the last thing would be a little bit more creative, using OpenAI, ChatGPT to take a quote. Somebody sent, not a quote, but somebody sends in an email requesting a quote for some parts and things like that in Epicor, and how artificial intelligence, how OpenAI ChatGPT can assist you in building quotes in Epicor. All right, so we'll start with exchange rate entry. Now, before I go in and walk you through the recipe, let's go into Epicor and let's take a look at our exchange rate entry screen. So as a user, I'll come in, it takes me into the search box here, and then it asks me for the rate type code. So I might have multiples. I only have one here called rate type 1. And in there, I have my effective dates, right? So I can select an effective date, or I can create an effective date. Now, I can go to any website and I can copy and paste the rates. I can type them in. But when you do that, you might transpose numbers or fat finger, right? So here you can see for the Canadian dollar, it's showing 2.5, which is a little high. The euro is 9.933, that's high. And the peso is 1-to-1, that's high. So what we can do is we can automate our process and eliminate the, improve accuracy and eliminate the mistakes by building a simple recipe to automate that and update it. Now it starts with a trigger mechanism. Now Automation Studio can do real time, or you can schedule when things occur. So here on this trigger mechanism here, what we're looking at is we're going to base it on time units. And then I have the choice of minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or a custom schedule. So this one I'm going to do on a monthly basis. I'm going to trigger it once every month on the first day of the month at 1 a.m. in the morning. You can apply additional triggers here if you wanted to as well. But once I get that triggered, then I'm going to make my connection to my website that has the API. So in here, you'll make your connection. You have your credentials for logging in. And once I do that, I'm going to do a simple send request, and I'm going to use a method called get. So get is basically an inquiry or getting rows of information, right, through the API. Now, here I'm passing it the URL that was given to me for my API. As you can see down below here, in the response schema, it's bringing in all of the conversion rates. Now, I can take that and do my updates in Epicor. So first of all, I make my connection to Epicor. I'm using cloud today, but you can use on-premise or cloud. Username and password, API key, default your company. And then once I get that login information, then I can access all of the tables in Epicor, including user-defined tables and user-defined fields. For this one, it's the currency exchange rate table. I'm running multi-company on my system, so I'm telling it which company I'm going to update. The source currency is US dollar. And then I go right into the effective date. So when I click on this, you can see, let me scroll down a little here. You can see that it is bringing in the scheduled time, right, which is, I just drag that and drop it in, which is a SQL date time. As you can see, it's a SQL date time. So it will automatically strip out the time and just put in the date for my effective date. The target currency is CAD for Canadian. The rate group code is rate type 1. You saw me select. And then these are what we call data pills, right? So the data pill here is looking for the conversion rate, right? And if I pull that up, you can see that I have all my conversion rates here. I would simply drag and drop the Canadian dollar into the current rate, display rate, and current rate actual. And I'll update the Canadian dollar, the Swiss franc, the euro, the British pound, the peso, and the yen. So now I'll go ahead and test this recipe out. Now, the nice thing about Automation Studio, if it fails, it will tell you where it failed at. You can go in, look at the highlight, and figure out what the the issue is. It'll give you the error. But it also will walk you through the input and output of data, right? So if I were to go in my trigger, here's the input, here's the output. The input or the output being today's date, which is 2/6. And then I make my request to the API. And you can see that I have all of the currency exchange rates. And then if I go to the Canadian dollar, it's not 2.5, but 1.4303. The euro is not 9.933, but 0.9611. And the peso is not 1 to 1. It is 20.59. If I come back to my exchange rate entry screen and I back out, I'll have a new effective date of 2/6. And you can see that it brought in my currency exchange rates, right? So automatically updated that, and it's using an API to do that. So that's my first scenario for you. My next scenario is going to be maintaining customer information, right? And I'm going to do that with Salesforce. So in Salesforce, I'm going to create accounts. In that account, I want it to synchronize to accounts or to customers in Epicor. And vice versa. I want to be able to, in Epicor, either create an account or a customer and then synchronize that to Salesforce or do an update, right, in here, right? So I have my ABC Manufacturing, I have Addison, Albert Watson as my letter A's, right? So I'm going to create one called AJD Manufacturing, that's my initials, in Salesforce. Now, before I go there, I'm going to come out and we'll pull up recipes. And we'll go here. We'll pull up Salesforce. And I have two recipes in Salesforce. I have my Salesforce account creation, right? And this is going to look for a new or updated account in Salesforce, right? So again, I have my connection. In here, I have my credentials for logging in. And then once I do that, I have access to all the business objects in Salesforce. In this situation here, I'm going to use the account business object. And then there, I'm going to pass it the account ID, the account name, and the billing address information. I'm also creating a variable for my company, Epico3 being the company that I'm going to use. And then in Epicor, we have a table called systags, which allows me to link records from one application to the other. In the way I'm going to be doing it is I'm going to be using the sysrow ID from the customer, which is an internal ID, and I'm going to tie it to the account ID in Salesforce. So in my recipe here, I'm looking for that tag. If I find it, I'm then going to search that customer using the foreign sysrow ID. And then from there, I'll update the customer. So I'll map the data. You can see I have my account information, right? It's coming in from Salesforce, and I will be dragging and dropping that information into Epicor, right? Now, if it doesn't find that, it's going to create the customer, and it's going to use Epicor security, right? Or Epicor business logic, right? It'll look for duplicates and that type of thing. You can use BPMs, Epicor functions, or Automation Studio to auto-generate the cust ID. In this particular situation, I'm just going to grab the first 10 characters of the account name in Salesforce. And then I'm going to map the data coming from Salesforce, the account name, billing city, and address information into the record in Epicor. And then at the end, I will create the relationship. The systag will be created, the foreign sysrow ID, and the account name would be included. Now, so I'll go in and let's open up Salesforce. Then we'll come in and we'll pull up accounts. I'm going to add one here. We'll call it AJD Manufacturing. and I'll give it a phone number. And then we'll give it an address. Give it a city, a state, a zip code, and a country. And we'll save that. All right. And now I'll go back to Automation Studio and we'll run this recipe. So it does find the trigger. And as you can see here, there's my, this grabbed another one. So let me run it again to see if it will pick up the second trigger. Because I have multiple records. And this does it one record at a time. So here you can see there's my AGD manufacturing that was added, the address information, the company, Epic 03. And as I go down, you can see that it went and it searched the tag. There was no tag there. Therefore, it went in and it created the customer in Epicor, right? And at the end, what it did was it created the link between the two, right? So I have my Salesforce ID and my Epicor internal ID. Now the Salesforce ID you can see here at the top in the browser shows the alphanumeric, and then of course that's the internal in Epicor. Now if I come back here to customer and I refresh this grid, you'll see that I have an HAD manufacturing, and you'll notice that the business logic and business rules take effect. It put it on credit hold, right? I can also make it a prospect or a suspect. I made it a customer. And then in here, I'm going to put in suite B as the suite, and we'll go ahead and save that. Now I can come back here and I can go to my recipe and we'll back out of here. And we'll go to the second one. This is the one that's going the opposite way, right? So looking for the new or updated customer. So it looks at the customer table. It's grabbing the table, the fields that I need, like the cust ID, the number, the Cicero ID, the address information, my company Epic 03. Again, it's looking for that tag, right? So it's looking for the Salesforce account and it's looking for the Epicor. And if it finds it, it will update the account in Epicor and it will map the data, right? Update that Salesforce account with Epicor data. If it doesn't find it, it will create the account in Epicor, right? Which is not what we expect, right? We do expect it to update the record. So let's go here and let's see. So there's HAD manufacturing, right? There's a suite B. We look at the tag, it does find the tag, right? So there is the record, right? So there is a linkage between the two. And then as I go down here, you'll see that it went in and, oops, sorry, I have to do all the scrolling here. You'll see that it brings in that suite B into Salesforce. And if I come back into Salesforce and I go to details, you'll see that the suite B was added to Salesforce. So that's an example of a pre-built connector using a pre-built recipe that I slightly modified for my demo image to do synchronization between accounts and customers in Epicor and Salesforce. Now, the next thing I want to show you in our use cases today is I want to be able to set up a rule. And my rule is going to be for my suppliers and vendors, I'm going to set limits onto what they can submit as an AP invoice. And what I mean by that is a dollar limit. So they might have a $500 limit, $1,000 limit, whatever I set on there. when somebody submits when they send in an invoice and AP goes in and creates that AP record, if the amount is greater than their limit, I want to put it on hold, right? And if it's not, above their limit, then it's going to go ahead and process it, right? So from there, I will then use Automation Studio to create an email. In that email, I'll have a series of buttons, one for approve, one for reject, and one for viewing the AP invoice, right? So that will give me the ability as a finance person to take that, make my decision based off the tracker information, and then go in and either approve or reject it. All right, so let's go in and let's take a look at AP invoice entry. Start with our group. And then we'll create an invoice. Now with Application Studio, our screen modification tool, I went in here and I added user-defined fields for hold reason, hold date, approval reject reason, approval reject date. In here, I'll put in my supplier, Office Supply Depot. I'll put in today's date for the invoice, and the invoice number will be 54321-1, and the invoice amount will be $975. So with that, you can see the BPM is telling me the invoice has exceeded the vendor limit, so it'll be placed on hold pending approval, right? Now, with that, it also goes in and it checks the box for the invoice held, and in here it puts in a vendor limit hold reason. Now, when I hit the save button, it automatically updates the hold date with today's date. So that's what the BPM does, right? And I'm not going to show you that. I mean, it's something that you're probably familiar with. But again, it's a simple BPM that will set these rules, update some user-defined fields for me to interact with Automation Studio. Now, for Automation Studio, we have a couple recipes, right? So if I go into my AP invoice approval, this is another one that is a pre-built recipe in the industry template. So you can grab this one, you can modify it to meet your needs. But in here, it has two recipes that are that will run, right? First of all, we have one running in the background, and this is what we call a webhook, right? So this is where a URL can be attached to a button, and in that URL, which is the webhook, it's automatically generated by Epicor or by Automation Studio or Ricardo. You don't have to generate, there's no coding you have to do. All you have to do is give it a name. And then from there, you give it the payload, right? What you want to pass, like the AP invoice group, the invoice number, the invoice held flag, the supplier number, the approve reject reason, and the approve reject date. And then from there, you'll do whatever button they click on, it's going to update the invoice in Epicor. So the other recipe is the one that is doing the work, right? This is the one that is doing the logic. So if I come in here, I'm looking for a new or updated AP invoice. So I just created an invoice in there. I'm passing it the supplier number, the invoice number, the date, the amount, the invoice held flag, and some of my user-defined fields, right? I'm also checking to see if that invoice held flag was set to true, and you saw it flip in the screen. The BPM flipped it and put it on hold. From there, I'm going to go in and do some logic, different logic, right? I'm going to grab the supplier name, and I'm doing that by grabbing the supplier number, which comes from the newer updated AP invoice. So I grab the supplier number, which will give me the name, which I can put in my email. And then from there, I'm setting a variable for today's date for either the approve or the reject date. And then from there, I'm calling an email function. So this is a separate recipe. It's like a subroutine, right? So this is where I come in and I can configure an email template, who it's going to, the banner, the message. I can do this all in text, but I'm doing a little HTML. I'm bolding the invoice number, the invoice amount, and the name, right? And then from there, I'm configuring 3 buttons. I have one that says approve, one that says reject, and one that says view AP invoice. Now, the view AP invoice button is going to open up a deep link, which is a URL that will take me directly into AP invoice tracker. And as you can see, I'm passing it the invoice number. Now, once I make my decision, I can either approve or reject it. Again, I'm using that webhook, right, that you saw in the previous recipe. And you can also see that I'm making the invoice held flag. I'm setting it to false, taking it off a hold when I approve it. When I reject it, I'm keeping it on hold, right? I'm making it true. So we'll go ahead and test that recipe. And again, it's really nice to be able to see the input and output of data. So there's the AP invoice 54321-1, the amount $975, the vendor limit hold reason. The flag is set to true, so it's going to run through this logic here. There is my supplier, Office Supply Depot. And today's date is my approve or reject date. And then I have my email. So if I come up here and I pull up my email, you'll see that I have an email that is a device-friendly email. I can view it on a desktop, a tablet, or a mobile device. But as you can see, it bolded the invoice number, the invoice amount, the supplier name. I can now view that AP invoice. Now I'm logged into Epicor, so it didn't ask me to log in. But again, if I had an attachment where I can see the invoice or maybe view the comments, right? If there were any comments for me to view, I can view those and then I can make my decision. So from here, I'm going to approve it. It looks like everything's okay. And if I go back to AP invoice entry and I hit the refresh button, you'll see it took it off a hold, put in the approve reason and the approve date. So that's an example of using a BPM and Automation Studio to build an activity workflow and approval workflow for AP invoices. And as I mentioned earlier, there's actually several different types of approval flows that you can have. And in the industry templates, we do have ones for the AP invoice. We have ones for journal entries. We have ones for purchase orders, and we have ones for sales orders. So some of the ones that you can interact with. All right. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is an example of taking advantage of AI capabilities. In this situation here, I'm going to be using an OpenAI ChatGPT connector, right, to help me do some things via email and building quotes and Epicor and that type of thing, email responses and such. So the scenario is I have a customer that is looking for a quote. They're going to send me an email, and I'm going to have some recipes that are going to be listening for that email. And based off of the type of requests, it could be a quote, it could be an order, it could be an inquiry. I'm going to have a recipe that will determine the type. And then I have recipes that will either create a quote, create an order, or create an inquiry for me, right? So let me walk you through that. Let's go in. And we'll pull up our OpenAI. So in here, I have several recipes, right? One called email analysis for inquiry, quote, and an order, right? So if we pull this one up, and I have these running in the background, so we're going to view them. This is looking for a new or updated email coming from Outlook, right? It's looking for the email address that has AI in it, right? So that's what it's using to trigger the recipe. And then from there, I'm going to connect to OpenAI ChatGPT. Now you'll notice here in the system role message, I'm telling it that it's an email analysis, AI analysis tool. And I want it to analyze content coming from a customer. It'll either be an inquiry, a request for a new quote, or a request for an order. If the request is a customer inquiry, it may be related to an existing order. It may be related to an existing order, a quote, or request an inquiry, right? So that's what I'm telling it. Now I'm also giving it what that email type would look like in a sample JSON. So it'll be an email type with the type of email it is. So in this recipe here, you'll see that if it's an inquiry, it's going to open up this, it's going to call this recipe, which is the CRM case handler. If it's a quote, it's going to call the ability open AI quote. And if it's an order, then it's going to call the ability AI order, which means it'll generate that order, right? Now, in my scenario today, I'm expecting it to create a quote because that's what I'm going to be asking for. So if we look at the recipe in here, we're looking for the call. We're going to give it a schema for the quote line so that it has an example of what it would look like, the part, the quantity, the unit price, the need by date, the part description. And then I'm going back to OpenAI ChatGPT and I'm telling it its new role. I'm saying that, first of all, I'm giving it a reference date, which is today. And then I wanted to analyze the text and summarize the items that the customer wants to buy. I want to provide a JSON structure detailing the part number, the quantity, and need by date. And if there is no date, just assume 30 days in the future. So then I'm giving it a map, which is the JSON document. In there, it's going to have the part number, the quantity, the need by date. First of all, I'm going to search to see if I can find that contact. So I'm going to look at the email and I'm going to find the email address in one of our customer contacts. If I find that contact, then I'm going to look to see what customer it's tied to, right? And then from there, I can create my quote. So I'll be looping through the items that are in the email or the JSON that I generated. And I'm going to look for the parts and I will update the quote, right? So I'll either find the parts and then update the quote with the information, quote number, part description, quantity, and need by date. Now, what I want to do is I want to also send a message back, right? So I'm going to use OpenAI ChatGPT again to send a email response back to the requester, telling in, today is giving a reference date for today, and I'm telling it that it's an email HTML generating AI assistant, right? So I want it to generate an HTML email, a nice fancy type email. In it, we'll have the quote number, the name of the customer, and then detailing the parts that are on there. So the part numbers, part description, the order quantity, the need by date, and then summarizing the price and stuff, right? And I'm telling it here, it's very important that it is HTML. So again, if you were to code your email response in HTML, it would be a lot of work. So I'm telling it to do it for me. And then of course, I'll send out the email. All right. So let's go in and first of all, we will open up our emails. I'll come in here and I'll compose an email. Here I'll say need quote. Oops. And so I have this statement right here, right? This email, which is an unstructured email, right? In here, I'm telling it, can I get a quote for 10 DCD 100 SPs, 23 1032 KNUT, 46 DCD 300 OR, and 12 DCD 200 ml. So you'll notice I mixed and matched the quantities. I either typed out the number or I typed out the name. And then I'm also telling it to deliver to me by the end of the month, right? So that's my instructions for it. I'll say thank you. Give it my name and send it in. All right. So first of all, if I were to go back into my recipe here, the email analysis tool, we'll be looking for that email. So you can see it found one email, found the job here, and it queued it for processing. So now it is processing that event. And if I go back here and I pull up my quote entry before it builds the quote here, so you can see then what it did is it comes up and if I go here, it's looking for a quote. So again, found the job, right? It's processing that quote. Now, if I come back to here and I pull up my quote entry, I have a quote in here for 1261 is the quote number. And it made it to Addison as the customer. And then you can see that I had my DCD 100 SP, my 1032 KNUT, my DCD 300 OR, my DCD 200 ML. And then here is the quantity. I had 10, 23, 46, and 12. Now, if I were to go to the line item, you'll see that it automatically put in the need by date to the end of the month, right? I didn't give it a specific date. It automatically put in the need by date for the end of the month. And the last thing it did was it sent out a quote acknowledgement, right? So in there is that HTML email that I told you about, a nice table. It has, the parts listed, the price and the total, and it also indicated who it was going to and the quote number as well. So again, that's some of the things that you can do with OpenAI ChatGPT connector. It's just an example, right, of how you can, provide assistance in creating quotes, responding to inquiries, and things like that. All right, so that takes me to the end of the presentation and demonstration, and we open it up for questions. Pass it back to you, Ashley. Yep.
Thank you, Andy. That was a lot of great information. Just as Andy mentioned, we're going to go ahead and to our Q&A time. If you do have a question, please type that into the Q&A box on your control panel, and we'll go over those. I'm just giving it a minute here to see if we have any questions come in. And while we're waiting, this is part 3 of our integration series. We have part 4 scheduled for March. Be on the lookout for that. We're going to talk about custom API integrations. So register for that as well. Before we go today, Andy, was there anything else that you wanted to include? And then we'll see if we have any other questions come in.
Yeah, just to let everybody know that, Automation Studio is our go-forward tool. There may be some customers out there that are on-premise and use some that may be using Service Connect. Automation Studio is a replacement for Service Connect. We also have some customers that are using Jitterbit. And even though we still sell Jitterbit because it's a ITAR compliant tool, Automation Studio is the go-forward tool for our integrations. And as you can see with recipes that we add each time we release the product, a new upgrade or update is added, or excuse me, new upgrades added, we will add additional recipes. And again, those are voted on through your Epicor ideas. So if you have one in particular that you're looking to get, maybe put it up there in the ID and see if people have that same need.
That's great. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for your time today.
Okay.
We thank everyone for attending. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. That was a lot of information. So if you do have any questions that you think of after this event, you can reach out to us at sales@encompass-inc.com or visit our website, www.encompass-inc.com. We'd be happy to answer those questions for you. I think that is it for today, and we look forward to seeing everyone next time. Thank you.
Thank you.